Who gon' take it there? 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 Electricity, 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 electricity. You know what's in the air. 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 It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility. It's possibility.
So Andrew Schulz did an interview on his Flagrant podcast with the Pod Save America guys and also Ro Khanna. Andrew Schulz, in a recent episode of Flagrant, I believe it was the most recent one, kind of flipped on Trump, saying that because Trump isn't releasing the Epstein files, that this was a betrayal. This isn't what he voted for. None of this shit is what he voted for. And he's upset about it. And they went through all the possible conspiracies of why Trump would be covering up the Epstein files, what it could possibly be that would motivate him to do that. And on this episode of Flagrant, he came in hot, pushing back against the criticism, because essentially the response to him coming out and saying that he didn't vote for this and didn't vote for a lot of the things that Trump is doing or not doing, a lot of people essentially said, well, you're an idiot. You're very stupid, and you were not only wrong, but you were loud and wrong. And so it is good that he is now admitting that he is wrong, but it's also not surprising that there would be a bunch of people ready to rub it in, especially because this is not like a particularly likable guy. I mean, the dude is an asshole, and he said a bunch of pretty foul things, and he continues this pattern of going way out on a limb, saying kind of the dumbest thing that he can think of to say, with a completely straight face, and then to sort of throw up his hands and be shocked and upset. The people are calling it what it is, which is very dumb. So I'll play a couple clips just so you can get a sense of like where his head is at. He had a decent conversation with the Pod Save America boys. They're more sort of on the liberal, close to the establishment side, although they talk a lot about how they, criticized the Biden administration and weren't necessarily welcomed by the Biden administration because they criticized it at the time, although they did not criticize, Biden's age, which is the main sticking point. That's the main thing that Schultz and his other podcast buddies keep bringing up to say is hypocritical on the Democratic side or the progressive leftist side, whatever, is that people supported Biden even though he was clearly not doing well pretty much from the moment he got elected. He was in rough shape the entire time. And so that's essentially their excuse, that and the fact that there wasn't a primary on the Democratic side. That's their excuse for why gravitating to Trump was a better idea, which I think in the case of many people who did end up voting for Trump or couldn't see themselves voting for Kamala, I think that is true. I think the process of it all and the bad taste that the Biden debacle left in a lot of people's mouths definitely contributed to why Trump did better and Kamala did worse than people expected. But I think, you essentially have wrong analyses abound here with the Pod Save guys. You've got, enough self-awareness to recognize that there's something going on with the podcast bros and something going on outside of their bubble of media that is relevant to, their electoral interests, but not really a recognition of what exactly needs to take place outside of the Democratic Party in order to take them in a different direction. So you see the Flagrant guys kind of trying to nudge them on this. Schultz seems to be embracing or flirting with the idea of embracing like the Zoran and Bernie style social democrats. And so he is kind of starting to take that position here, which I think more than anything just shows the desperate flip-flopping. Like, is that on its face a good thing that all of a sudden this guy with a platform wants to support a candidate like Zoran? Sure, but it's like there's no consistency here. There's no real backbone. So I'll get into all that later, but let me play a few clips from this episode so you can get a sense of his tone, and we'll move on to some other stuff from there.
No. Well, good Democrat, if somebody wants to change their mind on Donald Trump, says, no, you're not allowed to. And instead of wondering what maybe made you vote for him, you just say, you're stupid, you're a bad person, we don't change anything.
Oh,
we're perfect.
Because I figured what they would want to do is maybe win the midterms.
Oh, no.
Or maybe even win the election.
But you don't want to win, you want to be right just on Twitter.
So just right now.
Yeah, on Twitter for 5 minutes.
The most selfish thing that they could possibly be.
Yeah.
Only them. Just get some clicks and views.
But
I don't regret it at all. I don't even regret voting for him at all. Because what you see is all these Democrats that are starting to take up the issues that he was the one campaigning on. So essentially what he's done is pull the Democrat Party over to the center. What is the best way to handle like somebody that I voted for that is not living up to their promises? I'm criticizing them, and some responses are, well, yeah, you're a fucking idiot. And I was like, I don't know if that's the best way to build a coalition. What do you think? What do you think about that, Sean?
No, that shit drives me nuts, because I think, first of all, Trump lies a lot. He's always lied a lot. And it also assumes that every single person in America was supposed to be paying attention to like every single word that Donald Trump has ever said.
Right.
And which they're not. But then aside from all that, like you said, if you want to persuade people to join your coalition, which is how you actually win elections, then when someone says, oh, I'm disappointed in the person I voted for, you say, well, welcome.
He has a lot of people that are like concerned or disillusioned because a lot of the things that he was promising weren't really policies. Like releasing the Epstein file isn't a policy. Ending foreign wars isn't a policy, right? Like, I guess reducing government spending, there are ways that you would attempt to do it, but maybe it didn't happen. But like, some of these things are promises that are very difficult in execution. And even with Israel specifically, it looked like he was taking a hard line with Bibi. And then I don't know if it was his ego, like he just couldn't let that mission that was so successful that they did go on without feeling like he was somewhat in control of it. I just don't understand the impulse. But it seemed like he gave away so much diplomatic currency by saying, yeah, I was actually negotiating with them, but I was with Israel the whole time. It's like, well, now anybody else you negotiate, what do you think they're thinking? I wonder if they're going to get that fucking window blown open.
So the sarcastic tone that they're taking, they did this in the previous episode too, where they spent pretty much the whole time talking about Epstein, and they had their silly little tinfoil hats on the whole time. That was kind of the bit. But the whole time they were kind of mocking, like trying to come up with conspiracies as to why there were no Epstein files, and that was the bit. And so it was essentially sarcasm leading into this idea that, man, I didn't vote for this and shouldn't have supported Trump. I didn't know Trump was going to be like this. So that was the clip that everybody was talking about, that he was supposedly incensed by and responded to with more sarcasm here. So you get this sarcastic tone where they're kind of lecturing the Democratic Party. I don't know exactly who he's talking about, because he talks about, people talking about him online and doing stuff for clicks or whatever, but that's not necessarily the Democratic Party, because he's making this plea to the Democratic Party. Look, if you guys want to win over voters, blah blah blah, you're gonna have to listen, but I mean, that's not my job. My job is not to win over your vote, and I don't think anybody should hold themselves back for calling you an idiot when you are making such a blatant display of what an idiot you are. So I don't blame the Pod Save guys for going and talking to you. I don't blame Ro Khanna for going and talking to you. I think there's some people who would, but I really think that what we're running into here is just a personality issue. And people forget about that aspect of politics, that it's like people will certainly be drawn to certain politicians like Trump because of personality. It's aspects not just of Trump's personality that appeal to them, but of their own personalities that draws them towards certain things, which could be anything from like kind of cruelty to proclivity towards guns. You like guns, or you like the arts. Even like being anti-vax is like a skepticism of science and neuroticism. And so these are like personality traits that are somewhat measurable, and a lot of those measurements of personality that take place on social media based on what you engage with and that sort of thing, that's kind of what dictates what you're shown about which candidates, what clips you're shown, what types of images you're shown, etc. And so a guy like Andrew Schulz, like I said, they're kind of lecturing the whole time about this is, if you want to win back voters, you gotta, and to an extent, I think that's true. Since the election, despite the fact that I don't think the people who went for Trump, by and large, are the people that the Democratic Party or other parties need to be chasing after. However, I have said since the election that it shows that culturally there's something going on, that whether you're in the Democratic Party or you're on the left or the far left or wherever you're at in the spectrum, you got to get a grip on. We got to get a grip on this cultural movement, because a lot of people who are not highly politically radicalized found themselves voting for a pretty highly politically radicalized candidate, a pretty unabashedly radicalized candidate. And so Andrew Schultz, I think, is kind of a bad example of that, but his audience that he has attracted is a good example of that. And I think the audience is really what it all comes down to. That's the kind of place that we're at in our media environment and just general economy, is that if you have an audience, if you have people that are tuning in, watching you, listening to you, whatever, that's a certain amount of power that comes with that. And so, yes, this Andrew Schultz guy is a joke. And I think the funniest thing about this whole thing with these comedians going out on a limb for Trump and then immediately reversing course is just how flimsy the whole thing is, because they do this full-throated endorsement of Trump, no pun intended, and they get so excited about it, only to, within 6 months, be convinced that Trump has turned his back on them and that it wasn't worth voting for him. And Schultz even says here that he doesn't regret voting for him. So he's already signaling that what he wants is an excuse to go back in the other direction. He doesn't want to keep going against Trump, especially because he doesn't feel welcome going the other direction. And so that is, I think, an important part of this political dynamic, is how welcoming should any movement on the left, Democratic Party, further left than that, Democratic Socialist, whatever, how welcoming should they be to voters like this? The Zohran Mamdani strategy was to be as welcoming as possible. Zohran Mamdani went and talked to voters exactly like Andrew Schultz, and that was part of what kind of paved the way for his campaign style focused on economic issues, willing to take big swings at Trump, willing to take big swings in general. And Zohran has pointed out multiple times that the voters in New York that he talked to that voted for Trump for one reason or another, by and large, what they wanted was a candidate who focused on the economy. So when I say voters like Andrew Schultz, I'm not talking about like affluent, wealthy guys who have a platform. I'm talking about, guys who are used to voting for Democrats or always thought of themselves as Democrats. But for some reason, the credibility of Democrats has been chipped away at. And for some reason, they found themselves thinking Trump was a bit more of a change candidate this time around. And Schultz is not, the only person who thinks that way. And yes, he's very dumb, and it's very easy. He keeps putting himself out there saying extremely dumb things. Not just things that are jokes, easy to take out of context, but like really working his way through a premise, maybe with a bit of a joking intent, but, just repeatedly making himself look like an idiot and then getting upset that people are looking at him that way. And it's like, yeah, man, you're in an arena now where people don't necessarily care about your license to entertain. People care about the things that you're saying. And it doesn't have to be that way. You don't have to take these big leaps when it comes to politics to try to get yourself out there. But that's what he's doing, and he's still doing it now. He's talking to Ro Khanna, he's talking to Pete Buttigieg. He's clearly taking an interest in people who have a different message from Donald Trump. And so I point that out not to say that I think he's making some kind of change, but I do think, he's on his platform talking about the midterm elections and, what the Democrats are going to do from here. So it doesn't seem like he has any intention of not talking about politics anymore. And so that means that as long as he continues to maintain some kind of audience, he's going to continue to maintain some kind of political impact. And so we should probably, be paying attention to that. And the thing that him and his buddy are both saying here is that because they made a mistake endorsing Trump, they had a bigger impact in the election than they thought, and it turned out to be in the wrong direction. They are now saying the Democratic Party should come to them, should drift towards them. And that is the part that I reject. I don't think that we should reject Andrew Schultz whole cloth, people like him, people who may have voted for Trump, or people who are just generally politically uninformed. I don't think we should reject them whole cloth. But I do think the idea that the Democratic Party has to figure out what's going on in the mind of a person like this and go there, I'm dubious of. And that worked in the case of Zohran Mamdani, but that's a very particular voter makeup of New York City. And the voters that were changing their mind in New York City and voting for Trump and AOC on the same ballot were just a very particular kind of voter. So there's something to be said for that strategy, nationwide. But at the same time, I don't think that didn't happen. Zohran Mamdani didn't win those people, or even a guy like Schultz and others like him, by saying what they thought they wanted to hear. He did it by saying what he decided needed to be said, coming from his background as a socialist and a democratic socialist. And that, as well as listening to the concerns of voters, is what informed a strategy that ended up being a winning strategy. And so whether it's Schultz or other guys in these echo chambers or just voters at large, what they need to hear is something concrete ideas that can capture the momentum of the way Trump speaks and the electricity, no pun intended, of the way Trump speaks, and use that to deliver on actually good policy. And Schultz even says there that a lot of what Trump was offering was not policy. It was just a feeling. It was how you feel about a policy. Trump would just kind of take something that somebody else has done, or a recognizable political term, and he would just sort of riff on it, and he would find ways to relate to these topics that many people found relatable. And that was how he was able to convince them that he's fighting for them. And so, yes, Democrats and leftists need a version of that, but it also needs to be attached to a real political ethic. And that's where guys like this have nothing to offer. They have nothing to offer in terms of policy or what they actually want. They will go with the flow. So we don't have to cater to these guys' policy ideas in order to win over the momentum and the audiences that voted against us in this previous election. What we've got to do is build a better movement that's more attractive, that is somewhat welcoming, and that's wide and broad enough that many people can get involved, so it doesn't feel like an insular thing that you might or might not be allowed into. Because community-wise, we can construct things that way to protect ourselves from outside forces. But when it comes to making broad societal change, one way or the other, we got to win elections. However those elections work, many people have to be won over in order to change things for the better. And I'll leave with an interesting thing that Ro Khanna said about the type of presidency that Bernie Sanders would have had, which was the reason that Ro Khanna supported Bernie Sanders in the first place, which was to basically advocate loudly and fearlessly to break through the kind of muck of Congress, drain the swamp in a sense, although not so much talking about corruption, but talking about the general inertia of Congress, where you can't even get bills on the floor without passing certain committees. People block it in committee, it never reaches the floor, never gets voted on. And Ro Khanna is saying that Bernie Sanders would name the people who were blocking certain bills, like the bill to release the Epstein files that Ro Khanna has introduced, name those people, shame them, and use the bully pulpit of the presidency to push things through, force things through Congress, even in incredibly politically unlikely situations. Because when you have large amounts of the population behind something, plus a president who is actively advocating for it, now you have some seriously intense momentum. So let's just listen to Ro Khanna on that real quick.
The reason I supported Bernie Sanders is because he was actually going to fight this stuff. I mean, that's why was a co-chair of his campaign, because he would have gotten on and he would have gone from the Oval Office or whatever, and he'd be like, let me tell you, here are the people on the Rules Committee. Here's why we're not getting a vote. And I'm going to actually push this thing through to get a ban on super PACs or get a ban on money. But you're absolutely right. It's going to take a president. And the reason it's going to take a president is otherwise people campaign and then they don't pay attention to the details. So every Democrat will say, okay, we want to ban super PACs. And let's say we get the majority. Then are we actually going to be putting a bill to ban super PACs? Last time we did, it was called H.R. 1 when Biden was president. The House passed it, and then the Senate couldn't get it passed because of the quote-unquote filibuster. That was Manchin, Sinema, a few other people who didn't want to pass it. But you need a president basically putting sunlight on all this and calling out people by name who are standing in the way.
Like this video, please like and subscribe. And if you really want to support, consider becoming a member. That's the best way to support this channel. I'm also running a live stream now of my own music and content 24/7. So go check that out if you're interested in the music. You can drop a comment in the chat. Tell me what you think of the music or ask me a question. I'm going to be kind of checking in on the chat there regularly just to talk to you guys if you have any questions for me or want to suggest things. And then if you send super chats in there too, I can read those on the pod. Just some new things that I'm trying out. I also got my website up with a little bit of merch on there, just a hoodie and a hat for now. I'm selling those at retail price just to try to get some stuff out there. So if any of that is your cup of tea, check it out and become a member if you want access to exclusive music and different kinds of content before anybody else gets it.